Over the past decade, leaders in global health have helped us understand the concept of a dual burden of disease. In short, this refers to infectious diseases that often emerge from the developing world as a byproduct of poverty, famine, lack of access to clean, safe water, and forced migration tied to warfare on the one hand, and chronic diseases emerging from the developed world as a result of tobacco marketing, cancer and obesity-inducing diets, and pollution on the other hand. Globalization, with the export of conditions such as bird flu and resistant TB in one direction, and the export of Marlboro advertising and the modern diet in the reverse direction, have assured that we soon will share the worst of both worlds on both sides. A particular case in point of this phenomenon is U.S. factory farming and the exportation of the modern American diet. First, a disclaimer. The success of modern farming is undeniable. It's been reliably estimated that natural farming, independent of any of the high-yield interventions of the past century, would provide enough food only to feed 600 million people worldwide, not the 6 billion we currently support. And even with this, there are some 700 to 800 million undernourished global citizens today. Now, that's not to say, however, that there have not been trade-offs in environmental contamination and a steady march toward high-protein, high-corn, high-processed, and high-consumption foods, which translate reliably into chronic disease and chronic obesity. As the UN and the WHO have rightly sounded the alarm when U.S. tobacco companies turned their marketing machine overseas, there's now the same need to sound the alarm on export of our unhealthy diet. Let's take a look at meat as a case in point. In the U.S., meat shares a protected status with oil, receiving increased federal subsidies as control has centralized. Prices have climbed and worldwide demand has grown. Beef today is built on corn, and to a lesser extent, soybean on factory farms with huge confined animal feeding operations. These assembly line operations consume enormous amounts of water, energy, and food additives, including antibiotics, while producing significant pollutants and greenhouse gases. Where it used to take 5 years plus to bring a cow to slaughter, now takes only 18 months of forced feeding, growth enhancements, and animal antibiotics to partially counteract the corrosive effects of subjecting the cow's rumen to difficult to digest but fast fattening corn rather than natural grain feed. The world's total meat production in 1961 was 71 million tons, while today it approaches 300 million tons annually. Worldwide, per capita consumption during the 50-year period roughly doubled, and is expected to double again in the next 40 years. The rate of increased consumption of beef is growing fastest in the developing world, but for sheer overconsumption, it's hard to beat Americans. We each consume an average 8 ounces a day of meat, about twice the global average. 50 years ago, we consumed about 50 pounds of meat, poultry, and fish per person per year. Today, we consume almost 200 pounds. That's about 110 grams of protein a day, which is twice the recommended amount and close to 3 times what we probably need. Our factory farms provide 15% of the world's meat, in spite of the fact that we're only 5% of the world's population. In numbers, we grow and take to the slaughter about 10 billion animals a year. Some of that production is exported to developing nations, where a portion of the growing wealth has been directed at higher protein diets. But the waste from our factory farms can't be as readily exported. Our U.S. livestock produces together approximately 3 tons of manure for each and every American every year. This helps explain why nearly 3/4 of the water quality problems in our nation's rivers and streams are agriculture related. There's also the issue of deforestation. Factory protein farms require corn-fed animals. For speedy, if not healthy, growing animals. Meeting the growing demand of factory farms and ethanol producers for corn requires more and more fields. To create the fields, you have to clear the trees and natural vegetation. This eliminates plant life that's extremely effective in removing carbon from the atmosphere. Worldwide, livestock production is estimated to be responsible for nearly 20% of greenhouse gases. Moving back down the modern diet trail from beef to chicken to grain, therefore, has predictable positive environmental benefits. The National Institute of Livestock and Grassland Science in Japan estimated that consumption of 2.2 pounds of beef results in the release of as much carbon dioxide as a 155-mile car trip, and consumes in the creation and delivery of that beef to you as much energy as required to light a 100-watt incandescent bulb for 100 hours. Then there's the issue of water consumption. 70% of the water use worldwide is the result of agricultural use, where it takes 1.5 units of water to produce 1 unit of grain. It takes 6 units of water for a unit of chicken and 15 units of water for just 1 unit of beef. Finally, it's quite clear that as the U.S. and other developed nations have shifted increasingly from grains to corn-based processed foods and meats, that our rates of chronic diseases, including diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, strokes, and certain cancers, have escalated. And now we have these chronic diseases riding on the back of diet-induced childhood obesity, invading the young and the middle-aged at alarming rates. So, what should we do? Well, number one, we need to push public education as it relates to food. We need to be far more sophisticated and enlightened when it comes to understanding what's in our diet and how it got there, and what are the costs and benefits of each type of food, including their impact on our environment. Number two, we need to begin to shift back to grains. We've clearly overshot on protein and on portion size, both of which could be cut in half with room to spare. And three, we should be very careful not to support the export of the American diet to developing nations. We do them no favor and could do them much harm. For Health Commentary, I'm Mike Magee.